Alan Aragon, welcome, man.
Hey Luke, it's really a pleasure to be here. And as I mentioned while we were chatting, it's always an honor to get invited to speak by a registered dietitian. So thank you extra.
I appreciate that. I feel like I've been somebody who's been very proud of my profession, but also wanting to continue to be better and to not just kind of fit the normal structure of what a dietitian might look like or what they might be in the space. And yeah, going through all the school and going into a online space that we see today, and it's just like, holy shit, I went through all this schooling just to fucking defend bananas and oats as much as I do now. It's comical to me. But yeah, I have a lot of respect for dietitians just because I did my training under them, and I'm proud to call myself one. But yeah, I know that's not the end all be all, and it's funny how dietitians I don't think get the same level of respect as other people might in the space, and that's something that we definitely try and bring to people's attention sometimes as credentials. But as you know, too, credentials aren't everything, and especially when we
Mhm.
look at the complexities of social media and people putting out health content out there, people with no credentials, people with high quality credentials, dietitians with credentials getting into these spaces. It's like just because we have some titles behind our names does not make us immune to falling for certain things or spreading information that might be, I don't know, not as evidence based, but yeah, that's kind of just been my pledge for me growing my business and growing my online presence. Is just trying to do the best I can and following people like yourself and learning from people like you and other greats in the space. I accredit a lot of the just transformation that I've had since coming out of school and starting my own business and working with humans. So that means a lot, dude. Dietitians,
Love to hear that.
yeah, we're great, but it's fun. I've started podcasting for a couple years now. I've had a lot of incredible guests, but there's like people people on like tier one that are like dreams of mine to have on the show. I'm going to gas you up in a second, but before I even say my 2 cents on you and why I'm excited to have you here, like I'm just curious, like do you ever get tired of like hearing people say, "Oh, Alan Aragon's, the best," or "Thank you for all you've
Mhm.
done for me," or people bowing down to you? Or I guess even a better question would be like, did you anticipate your career leading you to the spot that you're in right now? Starting off at you can explain to researching, writing research reviews, doing peer-reviewed articles, coaching clients, being a personal trainer. It's like now you look at yourself 10, 20, 30 years down the road. Like, did you ever expect this spot that you're in of like, oh, people want me to come on my show and now I'm working for NCI or like whatever the case may be. I'm curious if you ever thought that this would be your life at one point.
My man, not at all. I honestly initially just wanted to be a successful personal trainer and pay my bills. And who knows, maybe get married at some point. That was my mentality in my 20s, incredibly so. And so going from that to transitioning to having a brick and mortar nutritional counseling practice where I literally sat down and counseled people on nutritional and dietary goals and practices and that whole thing. Basically what a dietitian would do in a private practice setting, I didn't even predict that. And so when 20 years went by and I started my research and education career, which has been going on now for another 12 years, going on 13. So we're at year 33 today of my career in its entirety. I would not have predicted those second and third phases, the diet, the dietary counseling phase, and then the research and education and media phase. And right now, you mentioned that I'm part of the NCI team. I wouldn't have predicted that either. I thought I was just going to be an entrepreneur until the sunset on my life. But NCI and now NCI / Clean Health have presented me with an incredible opportunity that I would have been foolish to turn down. And so I actually can, I mean, in essence, work with them to get the message and the education out to much more people at this point. And it's just been a really good thing, man. So yeah, no, there's no way at all that I would have predicted that I would end up where I am right now. And I never ever get tired of being called really, really nice things, really complimentary things like, well, the stuff the good stuff you hear. I never get tired about that.
Yeah, it's well deserved, and you deserve every every compliment that you get, and that's kind of where I want to give your little intro for myself, because I know you hear it a lot, like, hey, how did insert person help me in my life or get me to a better place? And there's a lot of people that meet that criteria, people that I've looked up to, you being one of them, in terms of like people that have really helped me take my career, take my knowledge, or just my thought patterns to a different level. That, again, at the end of the day, is helping the client, right? It's helping my audience. It's helping the people that I am in business to serve. And I thank you for that. But I feel like my introduction to you comes later than maybe where a lot of people might have found you early on, bodybuilding forums, like, a lot, 10, 20 years ago. Like, I say a long time ago, like that's decades ago, because it is. But for me, it started in around 2020 or so, when pandemic hit. Obviously, I was working full time as a renal dietitian, helping people, coming to dialysis 3 times a week, or I had a home clinic that I managed as well, people doing peritoneal dialysis. Right before that, I was doing work in the ICU, and doing acute care work in the hospital, also traveling around to nursing homes in the area. So I just was doing the standard dietitian entry level jobs that a lot of people get out of school. And for me, when the pandemic hit, and I really personally didn't love the settings, that I was working in, outpatient or acute care, working in skilled nursing homes or rehabilitation centers. For me, I found a lot more passion helping generally healthy people, prevent them from, getting to those certain disease states, or ideally helping them, with weight loss or building muscle, or just being more proactive instead of dealing with like the tertiary prevention type of world that dietitians a lot of times are in, which we need. And it was great. Learned a lot. But getting into online coaching and starting my own business, I realized in all my years of schooling, like how little I actually knew when it came to helping generally healthy people, or when it came to helping people who didn't really have a lot of stuff going on, or who had 10 or 15 pounds that they wanted to lose, or to wanted to get into the gym. And of course, there was fundamentals and basics that I took for me from all the clinical experience that I had. But it wasn't until I found your research review, listened to podcasts that you were on, started reading a lot of your work, and peer reviewed studies and all these things that you've put so much work into, where I really started to get a grasp of like what was important, and what are the big rocks that a lot of people can really benefit from, and not get lost in the fucking weeds of, all the infinite amount of health information that you might find out there right now. And I find that over the last 2, 3, 4 years, since like immersing myself into you, I've done a lot of other certifications. I'm just finishing up, MNU with Martin McDonald right now. I've done a lot of personal development and education, but you were kind of the driving force behind some of that, and I'm very grateful for that, because I don't think I'd be the person or the coach or the practitioner I am today. It's not to say that I'm at my finish line by any means, but it helped me just scratch that itch of wanting to learn more, and to be able to find real world just applicability in a lot of the nutrition space that are going to better help serve my clients and the general population as a whole. So that was kind of my introduction to you. And ever since then, I've just admired you kind of from a distance, and in all the work that you've continued to do, have done, and you just have made the nutrition space better. And I can't thank you enough for that. I know I speak for a lot of people when I say that. So that's my introduction for you, and how that all came to be, and why this is kind of like a come full circle moment. I get to have you on the podcast, and we get to talk about some fun stuff today. But I want you to do your little intro podcast kind of thing that you probably always do. And I don't even know how you conceptualize like fitting into your whole career into a little intro, but do your best of, for the people who've been living under a rock, like, who is Alan Aragon, and what are you doing today?
Sure. So I was one of the pioneers of the evidence-based movement in the fitness industry. And I would say that maybe started the beginnings of it kind of started about 15 years ago or so. And then it just started snowballing really within the last 5 to 10 years. And the fitness industry was mainly dominated by marketing and commercial interests, and really driven by the visual aspects of things, the physiques and the glamour and the glory of becoming jacked and tan and waxed, you know. So and wearing neon lycra. But the wedge that I guess myself and my colleagues drove into that state of affairs was, okay, we need to look a little bit beyond just listening to anecdotes and listening to the most spectacular looking people with the strongest opinions, and kind of take the model of evidence-based practice in medicine, where there was a research basis for their prescriptions and their approaches, their modalities, and um, the fitness industry had this burgeoning research basis upon which we could draw from to make better recommendations, to make more scientific recommendations. And that was the whole goal. We wanted something a bit more objective than looking at the most jacked or fit person and listening to them than what they had to say works best. And so um, I got that ball rolling along with a handful of other people 15-ish years ago. And I'm happy to say that the evidence-based movement in the fitness and nutrition sphere has spread pretty well, especially because of the flourishing of social media and I guess the growing popularity of wanting to put out high quality information in the face of a constant deluge of really, really low quality information and just plain BS that's propagated by people who see the opportunity to spit out these emotionally charged claims to make a lot of money. And it's an ongoing challenge. Another part of my role as of the past like 12-ish years is to put out the research, um, the peer-reviewed publications, whether it's the trials or the various types of summational research like narrative reviews, systematic reviews, and meta-analyses. So just pushing out that research so we can get the professionals more aware, more literate in terms of the scientific side of what's going on with what we're learning about the human body for various fitness related goals. And then ultimately, my colleagues and I have been able to shape the practice guidelines of nutrition folks and trainers, dietitians, and coaches. And that's been a really gratifying thing too, to be able to work on things like position statements, position papers, and various highly influential bits of research that people rely on to say, hey, you need this much protein a day, or hey, this is how you distribute protein through the course of the day in order to maximally, gain muscle, or things like that, things that really matter, So I guess that's my convoluted summary of who I am and where we're at today.
Love it, dude. Thank you for that. It's impressive. You can put 30 years worth of experience within a 2 minute stretch there. But for the people who, are listening and who have never heard of Alan before, I think one of the best ways that I could put you in your role, which there are a ton, and other people in your position as well, is like when we look at like the hierarchy or just like how information comes to be, especially in the nutrition space. We have the people in the labs, the researchers, the people asking the questions, the people following through with these experiments and publishing the results from what their findings are. And then we have people, which is Alan. And then we have also people who are disseminating that information, who are interpreting it, who are comparing that to what the body of literature has to say, who are writing, peer-reviewed papers on it, or these systematic reviews that are analyzing a lot of these, similar topics and seeing how everything fits together. And then disseminating that information to someone like myself or other coaches or other healthcare professionals in the space who are maybe not reading every research paper that comes out. I'm not saying that you read every research paper that comes out either, but reading research is a skill in its own, and not everybody, even myself, having been through a master's program, my undergrad, MNU, like I feel pretty competent in being able to pick up on what a research paper might be saying and some of the limitations and how that might apply to other things that we can compare that to. But not everyone has time to do that. So there are people like Alan who are putting that information out there. People who have research reviews, are kind of up to date on current literature and what else is out there and how that's changing or further solidifying some of the things that we know to be true or have an idea on. And then it's the coaches like myself that read those, articles, those pieces of information, and then we further digest that and break it down in a way that our clients can comprehend or the general public can comprehend. And in a perfect world, like that's kind of the organization of like how people who are in the evidence-based community might get a lot of their information. So just to recap, you're kind of at the top of the pyramid in that sense, or the top of the funnel. And then there's a lot of other people kind of under you who are benefiting a lot from everything else that you guys are doing and keeping up to date on. So we appreciate you for that.
Thanks, man. Thank you. And I do see the weaknesses in my operation where I probably need to get out more to the social media audience and put out these bits of education that seem very elementary and trite to me, but might be actually very helpful and groundbreaking for people out there in the normal lay public space, So
Yeah.
that's something that I certainly need to get in on and be more active with.
And honestly, I mean, I feel like you just like saying yes to a lot of these podcasts. Yeah, I sent you a cold DM. I'm like, hey, do you want to come on? You saying yes to some of those things. I feel like just to validate you, because you have a finite amount of time that you could put towards everything else that you're doing. And maybe social media isn't the best one, but like, leave it to other coaches and professionals to have you on. And I feel like that's a good, efficient way for you to get a lot of your messages spread outside of what you might be doing for your day-to-day work. So again,
That makes me feel
fun.
better to hear that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And yeah, there's only so much that everybody could do. And yeah, you keep doing the stuff that you're really good at, and everyone else can kind of fill in the gaps around it. But the first thing I kind of want to dive into today, I'm staring at a book on my shelf called Flexible Dieting. From my knowledge, you're the person I think that coined that name or who kind of started using it a little bit more routinely, early on, early 2000s, 90s. I'm not sure when that came to be about. This whole, even like if it fits your macros kind of approach, I think was kind of coined by you or a group, you've been surrounded with. Can you confirm or deny that? But then also
Sure.
go into just let's lay the groundwork for today of like what is flexible dieting, right? Like what does flexible dieting entail? Because you said something earlier is like, hey, being a pioneer of like really leaning into this evidence-based style of practice when it comes to nutrition is, I don't know, not to say it's foreign because there's a lot of people doing it, but that's not the traditional route. Like that's not what makes people money a lot of times, right? And I
Mhm.
think from my question to you is like, and this is a very long question, so take what you want, but I feel
Mhm.
like a lot of times the way people approach their practice or their information or how they present stuff is like in contrast to other people, or they hear an ideology, they hear somebody talking, and it's like, well, what does these things say? And somebody talking about, oh, it's all hormones or it's all X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, how does that fit into the grand context of things? Like, are you accounting for calories? Like, are there other confounding variables that are at play here? And a lot of times some of these concepts and things I think can be birthed by debunking other things, or just like being counterpoints to other people in the space. So from my knowledge and from my standpoint, it feels like flexible dieting came in a world where bodybuilding was super prevalent, or just like bro science was prevalent. There's a lot of theories out there, but not a lot of actual science to back things up. Is that true or not? And just where did flexible dieting come from? And how would you
Mhm.
explain that to somebody who's never heard that before?
Yeah, the technical origins of flexible dieting were actually published in the peer-reviewed literature in the 1990s. And so the term dietary control, there were two types. There was rigid dietary control and flexible dietary control. And so that surfaced in the 90s in the peer-reviewed literature. As far as flexible dieting as a term, that appeared in the lay public space, um, I would give Lyle McDonald credit for putting that term out there in about 2005 or so, 2004 or 2005, where he wrote a book called Flexible Dieting or A Guide to Flexible Dieting, something like that. And of course, fast forward to 2022, when it was time to title my book, I didn't want to name it Flexible Dieting. But a good friend of mine who is very wise and savvy about how to come across to an audience, how to be successful as far as reach. And that's Brett Contreras, and he said, "Hey man, you got to write the book on flexible dieting, and not only that, you should title it Flexible Dieting." And I'm like, I don't really like that title, dude. It's been done. It's like, it sounds kind of trite to me. It sounds kind of gimmicky, whatever. And he's like, gimmicky or trite or whatever. It's going to have much more reach and much more pull than some sort of boring title like evidence-based nutrition. And so he essentially kind of begged me to title it Flexible Dieting. Otherwise, just watch it not do as well. And I'm like, I better listen to this guy. Brett's one of the most successful guys in the history of the freaking fitness industry. And so that's how I named the book Flexible Dieting.
Hell
I
yeah.
don't like the freaking title. Um,
Well, it's sold.
but that's what it is, and it's done very well, as per Brett's prediction about titling it that. And um, yeah, but back to the actual origins of flexible dieting in the literature. Um, Rigid dieting is a model where foods and dieting are viewed in a black or white kind of binary context. Whereas with flexible dieting, it really is about this gray scale where you can still have a good or a successful or an effective diet, but it doesn't have to have a very narrow set of foods. And it doesn't have to be a very specific and rigidly adhered to format. And this comes down to both the macronutrient distribution of the diet, to the food selection of the diet, and importantly, to the approach of dieting itself, whether your approach is quantitative and precise, or whether it's more habit based and qualitative and loose and abstract, even. Um, so flexible dieting doesn't see the dieting journey as you're either on the road or you've fallen off the cliff. It's more like, all right, if you veer off the road, just get right back on it. These things happen, life happens. Just keep trending forward. That's another concept in flexible dieting versus rigid dieting. So rigid dieting is really an all or nothing approach to how you see foods and diets. Flexible dieting is flexibility of the approach and a diligent individualization of the dietary variables from macronutrition to food selection to the quantitative versus qualitative approach to the dieting process itself. So, uh, hopefully that makes some kind of sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think if we just look at dietary trends over the past 30 years, 40 years, I think starting in the 90s, even with just like demonization of carbs and, prevalence of keto. And we have a lot of like different ways of thinking about nutrition now, different dietary trends. But I feel like the common thread between all of them was like, rigid dieting or more strict dieting or creating these rules around food or this good or bad food dichotomy that, has kind of been implanted in a lot of people's head. And I think, when I found flexible dieting or when I heard about it, like it's something that just like clicked to me, it like excluded this idea that one food independent of all other things are bad for us, right? Like that's just not a very level-headed way of thinking when it comes to nutrition, as you alluded to, which can be and is very much so kind of a grayscale instead of this just black or white way of thinking. But a lot of the dietary trends, a lot of the diet fads, a lot of the books that have come out it's usually the vilification of something or of a food group or different products or pointing the blame on things. When I think flexible dieting has really outlined the importance of like, how do all of these things fit with one another, right? And are there big things that maybe people are missing or aren't doing that, things like maybe understanding energy balance or how many calories your body is expending each day or how much it might take to actually lose weight, and understanding that the backbone of a lot of these claims, right? This like strict way of thinking, these really polarizing kind of, ideologies around, nutrition, where it's like, hey, it's this thing, and it's not contributing to this overarching kind of system of things that could be in place to kind of explain everything that's happening. So for me, flexible dieting, the first time I was introduced to it and kind of read about it and have learned about it, obviously, it made sense to me because I think a lot of people could benefit from that way of thinking, but it's something that has been conditioned in them so hard, probably since they've been kids. Their mothers doing, Weight Watchers or doing Atkins in the 90s, and, mom's eating salad. So the kids have to eat salad because the mac and cheese is bad, like I think at a very young age, a lot of this is deep rooted for a lot of people, and also factoring the idea that not everybody or most people don't even get a formal nutrition education or know the basics or the fundamentals of nutrition in the first place. So it's not random to me to see these thought processes, these ideologies really stand out and really be prevalent in different decades of our lives and kind of feed into this strict, rigid dieting cycle that a lot of people can get stuck into. So I feel like flexible dieting is another outlet that can help people take a step back, think a little bit more critically, understand how everything fits together, and not just have this black or white way of thinking, which, if we're being real, for a lot of people isn't super productive over their lifespan.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that another important aspect of the flexible dieting model is that people tend to misconstrue it as, okay, we're just going to count grams of protein, carbohydrate, and fat, and we're not going to care about where that's coming from. So, number one, flexible dieting originally started as, or was originally classified as a style of, a cognitive style of dietary restraint. And so it really originally had nothing to do with counting macronutrient grams. And so if under the flexible dieting model, if somebody enjoys the process of quantifying their diet down to that much of a micro level, and that fits with their style of dietary restraint, and that fits with their personal sort of psychographic, then more power to them. That's one of the avenues that you can take to control your intake. And then, of course, one level up would be just tracking portions of foods. And this is something that dietitians have been trained how to teach and how to work with people on better than anybody. And so there's more than one way of doing things. And then maybe another level up in vagueness and qualitativeness would just be gravitating more towards certain types of foods and less towards other foods, and then just sort of forming a routine around that. um, so there's different levels of granularity and quantification that people can take in order to make their dietary approach work in the long term. So not everybody for the rest of their lives is going to be punching in grams of carbohydrate, protein, and fat and calories and fiber into an app. Some people will, but the process of doing that can be very illuminating for people who really kind of have no clue as to what their total calories they're taking in are or what their macronutrient targets are. But if you can get to know that, that's valuable information. It's never hurt anybody to know how many calories am I taking in really, and how many grams of protein, carbs, and fats, and am I getting any, enough fiber to optimize my diet per the scientific consensus, or am I just sort of floating around blind here? And so it's a great boot camp period for a lot of people to be able to do that highly granular, highly quantitative tracking thing. but it's certainly not for everybody. And it's certainly counting macros is certainly not synonymous with the term flexible dieting. So flexible dieting says, hey, if you want to count macros, do the macro counting thing. Oh, if you want to just mainly keep track of portions, then you can do the portion thing. If you want to just do a little bit more of the eat more of this and less of that, and just be very kind of flexible and just stay within the ballpark, and maybe hit a certain minimum number on average of certain food groups per day, that is just as legit and sometimes even more effective than just counting gram targets of the macronutrients. And so I really have spent a certain amount of time and effort trying to clear up the myth that flexible dieting is counting macrograms when it's really not. And that term has been conflated with counting macros, with macro counting and flexible dieting have kind of become synonymized as far as like our community goes. But that's just not true. It's not true per the origins of the term.
For sure. For sure. I mean, I think that's a common thread with a lot of things where it's like, we're sitting here playing, fucking telephone as 10-year-olds and we're all under the parachute and someone says one word and then it goes around the circle of 30 people. And by the time that word gets back to the starting person, it's very different. I feel like that's very similar to a lot of the trends you could see in the health and fitness space where maybe the intentions or the origins of something that started in the beginning kind of gets, a little conflated or just different variations are being told or disclosed and slowly it takes or embodies a different definition over time compared to what it was actually intended to do in the beginning. So I couldn't agree more. And I think, one thing that comes to the top of my mind and a question that I'll have back for you is, at least with like observations and working with people and looking at people who want to get healthy, in general, right? Like, hey, what do I need to do to be healthier over the long span? I think the lifespan. I think a lot of people have this perception that rigidity and being strict, in the context of you usually losing weight, if people have weight to lose, or, we're kind of conditioned to thinking that there are healthy foods and really destructive inflammatory foods or insert bad foods, whatever, descriptive word we want to use. And a lot of times people take on this more strict or rigid dieting approach in pursuit of health, in pursuit of getting healthier, improving their blood markers or improving their body composition or whatever. And a lot of times in that pursuit, this whole flexible dieting can kind of go out the window because there's this thought process of like, hey, I know what's healthy and what's not healthy, and I need to do that to the extreme to get to where I want to be. And it's not until that point when people are like, okay, how can I embrace this flexible dieting mentality once I've gotten to this outcome goal or hit this weight loss target or have visible abs or insert whatever goal people might be working towards. When in reality, at least in my practice, something that I've seen is like embracing this whole like flexible dieting approach, understanding like how all of these things fit, understanding like how much protein we need a day or what calories could we or should we be eating, whether we're tracking them or not, right? Building consistency around diversifying our foods, getting in, fiber. Fiber for me has been a huge kind of like groundbreaking thing that I do a lot with my clients, because if you ask somebody off the street what 35 grams of fiber looks like, they have no fucking idea what that's, even looks like. So, hey, maybe we're not tracking macros. Maybe we're tracking protein and fiber or calories at the end of the day. But a lot of times doing the groundwork in the beginning and then getting to the point where it's like, oh, damn, I can, fit movie night in with the kids and we can have some of our favorite snacks and popcorn at the end of the night. And that's not something that's deterring me away from getting to my goal, right? Or that can fit. And then using that as a basis to like, okay, now if we want to cut calories, what would that look like? And understanding like how all of these things fit, I think could be a real benefit of people adopting this mentality of like, hey, how can I be flexible with my eating? And how can I do the things I know I need to do more of while still filling in the stuff that I enjoy, right? And things that likely aren't going to go away. Or if I were to sacrifice, my quality of life would go down because it would be, less enjoyable for me around food or whatever the case may be. Do you see that, or have you seen that in the space where people take on this mentality of like, I need to do all the right things all the time in pursuit to better health versus adopting this more like in moderation mindset, which is kind of subjective too at the end of the day, but like accounting for all the individual differences? I feel like people don't always do a good job of that if they're trying to go around losing weight or improving their health in the first place. I feel like the default setting for a lot of people is like, I just need to be super strict and take this to 100% of the time.
Yeah, I see a wide range of failed approaches and false approaches propagated online, and I see a lot of unfortunate um, testimonials of people doing fantastic on something, and then of course they're able to do amazing on it for 3 to 6 weeks, and then everything just falls apart and they disappear, and then on to the next fad. So it's really ironic when people try to uh, disparage the idea of moderation, because, and in fairness, the concept of moderation is rarely ever explained well, and it's rarely ever presented in a way that people can sink their teeth into and actually implement in a practical way. And so what happens is a lot of people who aren't exposed to how to do this stuff properly, they end up reading what they can online, and without a fundamental level of science literacy, it's possible to read something like, for example, um, diet sodas are bad. You'll get cancer from diet sodas. And so what people end up thinking, having one diet soda a day is an evil thing to do. But in the meantime, because let's say they read, okay, that'll give me cancer if I have like a diet soda or two a day. But in the meantime, they're having like 2 or 3 drinks, alcoholic beverages a day, or they're just binging alcohol on the weekends. And it just makes no sense at all, the way that people perceive their diet and then conduct their diet and then go ahead and preach what is the epitome of good health and whatnot. Now, ironically, alcoholic beverages are classed as a group 1 carcinogen by the World Health Organization. I don't agree with that. But artificially sweetened beverages, these diet sodas, have sort of a more forgiving class rating in terms of their carcinogenic potential than any kind of alcoholic beverage. And then you have these people who are really crapping all over diet sodas and really just getting tanked on a regular basis. I find that, humorous in a dark way. Um, and then there's other things like people injecting everything under the sun into their veins while telling people that, hey, sugar's going to kill you. It's like, what, dude? Like, what's going on right now? And the dose is always going to make the poison. Even, with the cliche example, even water can be toxic after a certain point. But there's some interesting way that human nature works, where we seem to be more powerfully motivated by threat and fear rather than how can we include certain foods in the diet? How can we include more foods in the diet, or more of a given set of foods, in order to affect things positively, like increase satiety, increase the spectrum of essential and non-essential but beneficial nutrients, and just sort of improve our quality of life, because we have more options of what to eat and enjoy, and know that it's doing us some good, even if it's not these archetypical, in quotes, health foods. So from a practical perspective, it really does help the general public to know that 80 to 90% of their calories can be from the archetypical, clean and healthy stuff, and 10 to 20% of it can be really, honestly, from anything you want. But you don't have to go 100% and 0% your whole life in order to live healthy. And in fact, the literature shows that that style is much more conducive to eating disorders and trouble with regulating body weight than eating on a model of like 80% wholesome stuff and 20% questionable or naughty stuff. So that's the reality of the matter. And the thing about introducing a gray scale like that is it's not as emotionally striking as telling people these foods are going to kill you. Ah, oh, these foods are going to maybe make you live forever. That's much more exciting to, that's what captures the public. They want to know what foods to vilify and what foods to deify. Just tell me the six superfoods that I need to eat in order to become thinner and richer. Just tell me.
I think that's a really great way of putting it. And I, I have a lot of thoughts on everything you just said, but the thing that sticks out to me the most are just like real world examples of how these things can play out, or the domino effect of, someone's way of thinking of like, oh, like the 80-20, flexible dieting, all foods can fit kind of mentality. It's like, okay, cool. And maybe, yeah, maybe that's exciting, or maybe that can work, but it doesn't sound like it, and I know I need to be better or more extreme. And then you have, you follow somebody who, uh, I hate to say names, but like someone like glucose goddess, where it's like, oh, you need to eat all your meals in a certain eating way, and you need to prevent glucose spikes at all levels. And you have all these people now who I'm thinking about, just low carb, the whole keto kind of movement stuff that we've seen over the last 10, 20 years or so still stay or get more prevalent, even as a classic example of like, give me a list of things I can eat, or give me a list of boundaries that I need to stay within to be able to improve my health or my metabolic markers, or this like fear mongering around carbohydrates being a really classic example of like a way of thinking that people are placing the blame on something, and they have to do something at all costs to avoid that in order to be healthy. And there's no in between. And that, I feel like, is a good transition into one of the questions I wanted to ask you today, or the topics I wanted to talk about, was like this whole like insulin and, blood sugar response after meals, and people micromanaging their, blood sugar response after meals. Uh, the whole like low carb movement. I think low carb and keto, they're not interchangeable, as we both know, but like kind of get blanketed into this kind of same thought, pattern of like low carb foods are better and more optimal for health, because there's a list of mechanisms that could quote unquote be improved by managing our, our carb intake at each meal, or our carb intake for the day. So I'm curious for you, and if we were to sit here and say like, hey, we're using, low carb, managing our blood sugars is kind of an example of how things can be taken to the extreme, and how a dietary protocol, and again, there's an infinite amount, intermittent fasting, and, the carnivore diet, and we can talk about vegan and vegetarian diets, but low carb, I think, is somebody or something that everybody has heard of. Probably people have tried at some point, or have this baseline level of fear around, okay, I can't eat too many carbs or refined sugar or fructose, right? And all of these things are contributing to bad health. So doing it less is in my best interest. But I've seen this kind of rise in popularity because of this good or bad way of thinking, and people going to the extreme and further away from this kind of balance approach in pursuits of better health, or thinking they're doing what's in the best interest for their health and their life long term. But for you, in just being in the space for a long time, what would a response to be for somebody who's like, hey, I want to lose weight. I know sugar is really bad for me, especially added sugar. And I know avoiding that at all costs is really important to me. And for those reasons, I'm going to go, low carb for a period of time in order to lose a certain amount of weight. What would a typical response, or if somebody was sitting here level headed and thinking like, that's my thought process, like, how could you prove me wrong? Or why wouldn't that be the best route for me if I were to also disclose that carbs are some of my favorite foods, right? Like, I like eating bread when I go out to dinner once a week with my family, or the thought of like having my, breakfast cereal in the morning or before my workout, removing that completely kind of repulses me. Like, a lot of people at some point will eat carbs again if they go low carb, right? Or carbs are going to be included in their life at some point throughout the rest of their life if they give it up temporarily. But what would be a response, or a typical kind of like way of thinking you would respond to somebody in that way of like, hey, is low carb the only option I have right now? Because people are making it seem like blood sugar responses, insulin resistance, and micromanaging my blood sugar after every single meal is like the most important thing for health. Like, what are some things that come to mind for you of like why that might not be the best way of thinking at the end of the day?
That is a really great question. So